65. The Magician. 1.
Another two-parter. Who is he going to run into this time?
When, however, Zarathustra had gone round a rock, then saw he on the same path, not far below him, a man who threw his limbs about like a maniac, and at last tumbled to the ground on his belly. "Halt," said then Zarathustra to his heart, "he there must surely be the higher man. From him came that dreadful cry of distress. I will see if I can help him."
At last, someone who seems to be in real distress. Is this the higher man he was looking for?
When, however, he ran to the spot where the man lay on the ground, he found a trembling old man with fixed eyes, and in spite of all Zarathustra's efforts to lift him and set him again on his feet, it was all in vain. The unfortunate one also did not seem to notice that someone was beside him. On the contrary, he continually looked around with moving gestures, like one forsaken and isolated from all the world.
Zarathustra tries to help the old man, but he seems to be in such a bad way that nothing can get to him.
At last, however, after much trembling and convulsion, and curling himself up, he began to lament thus: "Who warmth me, who loveth me still, give ardent fingers, give heartening charcoal warmers, prone, outstretched, trembling, like him half dead and cold, whose feet won warmth, and shaken, by unfamiliar fevers, shivering with sharpened icy cold frost arrows, by thee pursued my fancy."
Turns out there's actually nothing physically wrong with the old man. What ails him is of spiritual nature. He is lonely, and wants someone to love him, but the reason he is lonely is that he gave up on human relations to pursue something. There is some sort of fancy that has taken over his mind, and it torments him. We also learn that he has a skill of verse, as he launches into a long poem.
"Ineffable, recondite, sore, frightening, thou huntsman hind the cloud banks. Now lightning struck by thee, thou mocking eye that me in darkness watcheth, thus do I lie, bend myself, twist myself convulsed, with all eternal torture, and smitten by thee, cruelest huntsman, thou unfamiliar god."
The fancy that torments him is God. He feels the need to know God, feels that he cannot be happy unless he does, and he feels that God has put this yearning in him. But, on the other hand, God also hides himself, so we cannot know him. This discrepancy is what tortures his soul.
"Smite deeper, smite yet once more, pierce through and rend my heart. What mean'th this torture with dull indented arrows? Why look'st thou thither, of human pain not weary, with mischief-loving, godly flash glances? Not murder wilt thou, but torture. Torture? For why me torture, thou mischief-loving, unfamiliar god?"
But there is also pleasure in this torture. In fact, it became the strongest emotion in his life, the thing he lives for. He asks of God to make the torture even stronger.
"Ha ha! Thou stealest nigh in midnight's gloomy hour. What wilt thou? Speak! Thou crowdst me, pressest. Ha! Now far too closely. Thou hearst me breathing, thou o'erhearst my heart, thou ever jealous one. Of what, pray, ever jealous?"
He feels God being close, but still he can't get to him. Again, he seems to enjoy this torture.
"Off, off, for why the ladder? Wouldst thou get in? To heart in clamber, to mine own secrets, conceptions in clamber. Shameless one, thou unknown one, thief, what seek'st thou by thy stealing? What seek'st thou by thy hearkening?"
The ladder probably alludes to the biblical story of Jacob, who dreamt that he saw a ladder going up to the sky, and at the top of it appeared God and spoke to him. The poet says that God is trying to establish a connection with him as well, but he suspects that he just wants to get into his mind and read it.
"What seek'st thou by thy torturing, thou torturer, thou hangman god? Or shall I, as the mastiffs do, roll me before thee, and cringing, enraptured, frantical, my tail friendly waggle?"
Now he ponders that maybe God wants him to completely prostrate himself before him.
In vain goad further, cruelest goader. No dog, thy game just am I, cruelest huntsman, thy proudest of captives, thou robber hind the cloud banks.
But he refuses to reduce himself to that level. So this man, even though he is consumed by faith and wants to have a relationship with God, still insists on maintaining his individuality. He refuses to let God into his mind, and refuses to prostrate himself.
Speak, finally, thou lightning-veiled one, thou unknown one, speak. What wilt thou, highway ambusher, from me? What wilt thou, unfamiliar God? What? Ransom gold? How much of ransom gold? Solicit much, that biddeth my pride, and be concise, that biddeth mine other pride.
He is demanding of God to make his intentions clear, and tell him, at last, what he really wants from him. He asks, jokingly, if it is money he is after, and his pride demands that the ransom would be high.
Ha ha! Me want'st thou, me, entire? Ha ha! And torturest me, fool that thou art. Dead torturest quite my pride?
No, God doesn't want money, and definitely doesn't want to humor his pride. God wants him. He wants him to give up his pride in complete devotion. But he says that God is a fool if he believes that he is going to get it.
Give love to me, who warmth me still, who loveth me still. Give ardent fingers, give heartening charcoal warmers, give me the lonesomest, the ice, sevenfold frozen ice. For very enemies, for foes doth make one thirst. Give, yield to me, cruelest foe, thyself.
He repeats the opening lines of the poem, whining again that no one loves him, and says that if he can't have love, at least give him a worthy enemy to fight. He asks God to be that enemy.
Away! There fled he surely, my final only comrade, my greatest foe, mine unfamiliar, my hangman God.
But, he acknowledges, God is dead. He can no longer be an enemy.
Nay, come thou back, with all of thy great tortures, to me the last of lonesome ones. O come thou back. All my hot tears in streamlets trickle their course to thee, and all my final hearty fervour upgloweth to thee. O come thou back, mine unfamiliar God, my pain, my final bliss.
He can't handle the death of God. He needs the uncertainty and the torture that he felt when people still believed in God. He asks of God to return into people's hearts and into his heart, so he can feel these emotions again. This is how the first part of the chapter ends. How will Zarathustra react to this poor, tortured soul?
2. Here, however, Zarathustra could no longer restrain himself. He took his staff and struck the wailer with all his might. "Stop this!" cried he to him with wrathful laughter. "Stop this, thou stage player, thou false coiner, thou liar from the very heart. I know thee well. I will soon make warm legs to thee, thou evil magician. I know well how to make it hot for such as thou."
Zarathustra is not buying it. He sees this whole performance as a charade, and provides his critical opinion by first lashing the old man with his staff, then mocking his plea for someone to love and warm him, and finally calling him a magician, someone whose art is just illusion and trickery.
"Leave off," said the old man, and sprang up from the ground. "Strike me no more, O Zarathustra. I did it only for amusement. That kind of thing belongeth to mine art. Thee thyself I wanted to put to the proof when I gave this performance, and verily thou hast well detected me. But thou thyself hast given me no small proof of thyself. Thou art hard, thou wise Zarathustra. Hard strikest thou with thy truths. Thy cudgel forceth from me this truth."
The magician admits it, says he was only putting Zarathustra to the test, and commends him for not falling for it.
"Flatter not," answered Zarathustra, still excited and frowning. "Thou stage player from the heart, thou art false. Why speakest thou of truth? Thou peacock of peacocks, thou sea of vanity, what didst thou represent before me, thou evil magician? Whom was I meant to believe in when thou wailedst in such wise? The penitent in spirit, said the old man. It was him I represented. Thou thyself once devisedst this expression. The poet and magician, who at last turneth his spirit against himself, the transformed one who freezeth to death by his bad science and conscience.
Zarathustra rejects the compliment, since it comes from someone whose sincerity can never be trusted. He wants to know who the magician was masquerading as while he was putting on this performance. The magician answers that he was playing the penitent in spirit, whom Zarathustra spoke of in the Sublime Ones. There, Zarathustra typified the penitent in spirit as people who strive to live by metaphysical, eternal ideals. He praises them for trying to surpass their nature by striving for these transcendent ideals, but also says that their way is doomed. Self-surpassing should be done by striving for temporary, earthly ideals, because once your spirit creates such ideals for yourself, your nature can then elevate to become it. A metaphysical and eternal ideal, on the other hand, is detached from the earth, detached from nature, and therefore cannot elevate your nature, but just leaves your spirit frozen in outer space. The magician turned it into a poem, portraying a man who was thus frozen by seeking to know God, to see if Zarathustra will practice what he preached about dealing with such people. We note that the two men seem to know a lot about each other, even though this is the first time they meet. We know that Zarathustra is famous, but who is this magician?
And just acknowledge it. It was long, O Zarathustra, before thou discoveredst my trick and lie. Thou believedst in my distress, when thou heldest my head with both thy hands. I heard thee lament, we have loved him too little, because I so far deceived thee, my wickedness rejoiced in me. Thou mayest have deceived subtler ones than I, said Zarathustra sternly. I am not on my guard against deceivers. I have to be without precaution. So willeth my lot.
As many have pointed out, the magician is surely based on Nietzsche's old hero and mentor, Richard Wagner. Wagner was a giant figure in 19th century culture, a genius composer, a theoretician who revolutionized the art of opera, and a thinker who had a big influence on the German spirit. Opera, in the middle of the century, was considered merely a popular medium, basically what Hollywood was to the 20th century, but Wagner saw in it the highest form of art, a multimedia that can bring all art forms together. He wanted to turn it into the center of the German spirit, and through it, transform society and perfect it. He was ridiculed by the cultural elite of the time, but some youngsters were thrilled by his vision, and by his strong willpower that allowed him to actually build the opera house he theorized and turn it into an important cultural center. Nietzsche idolized the great man and sought him out, and Wagner realized the brilliancy of this young fan and took him in as a protege. For a while, Nietzsche was the philosopher of Wagner's court. But gradually, Nietzsche started to see things in Wagner that didn't chime with the image he was projecting. Worst of all, Wagner, the romantic individualist who was all about imposing his own will on the world, adopted the philosophy of Schopenhauer, the philosophy of stifling your individual will in the name of empathy and compassion for others. Nietzsche saw it as a betrayal, and started regarding Wagner as a fraud. The question of what made Wagner turn against his nature, or was he even that great to begin with, symbolized for him the breakdown and decline of the European spirit, and preoccupied his thoughts. Wagner is mentioned in practically every book that Nietzsche wrote, and he finds a way to insert him into this one as well. The poem that the magician was reciting is a parody of Wagner's style, and Zarathustra's beating him with a stick shows what Nietzsche thinks about it. The magician, however, feels like he scored a victory by having Zarathustra fool for a while, probably meant to signify those years that Nietzsche was enamored by Wagner, and lamented that he doesn't get the respect he deserves. Zarathustra, however, isn't ashamed of it. He already admitted, in Manly Prudence, that he is naive about humans. It's one of the downsides of his credo of seeing the good in everything, and he can live with this downside.
Thou, however, must deceive. So far do I know thee. Thou must ever be equivocal, trivical, quadrivical, and quinquivocal. Even what thou hast now confessed is not nearly true enough nor false enough for me. Thou bad false coiner, how couldst thou do otherwise? My very malady wouldst thou whitewash if thou showed thyself naked to the physician. Thus didst thou whitewash thy lie before me when thou saidst, I did so only for amusement. There was also seriousness therein. Thou art something of a penitent in spirit.
Zarathustra may be naive, but his naivete comes from his honest nature. The magician, on the other hand, is always deceitful and duplicitous. He can't help himself. His artistry corrupted his nature. Even when he admitted that he was only playing a character, he was lying. It wasn't all an act. There is something of the penitent in spirit in him as well. We'll have to read further to see what he means by that.
I divine thee well. Thou hast become the enchanter of all the world. But for thyself thou hast no lie or artifice left. Thou art disenchanted to thyself. Thou hast reaped disgust as thy one truth. No word in thee is any longer genuine, but thy mouth is so. That is to say, the disgust that cleaveth unto thy mouth.
Zarathustra basically accuses the magician, and Wagner by extension, of selling out. He found a way to enchant the entire world with his art, but he lost his integrity in the process. There is only one thing genuine about him, one thing that hasn't been corrupted, and that is the tone of his voice. The tone betrays the disgust he feels with himself, the disgust of knowing that he is nothing but a poseur.
Who art thou at all? Cried here the old magician with defiant voice, who dareth to speak thus unto me, the greatest man now living? And a green flash shot from his eye at Zarathustra, but immediately after he changed, and said sadly, Ah, Zarathustra, I am weary of it. I am disgusted with mine arts. I am not great. Why do I dissemble? But thou knowest it well, I sought for greatness.
Wagner was actually dead by then. He passed away about 2 years before this was written. But his avid fans were still touting him as the greatest man of his generation. He, too, when he was alive, had a very high opinion of himself. Here, however, Nietzsche portrays the magician as someone who knows in his heart that this isn't true. He managed to fool the whole world, but he can no longer fool himself. He sought greatness, but it wasn't in his nature to be so.
A great man I wanted to appear, and persuaded many. But the lie hath been beyond my power. On it do I collapse. O Zarathustra, everything is a lie in me. But that I collapse, this, my collapsing, is genuine.
Now he tries to persuade Zarathustra that at least here, once he admitted that he isn't great, and his self-esteem collapsed because of it, he is finally genuine.
It honoureth thee, said Zarathustra gloomily, looking down with sidelong glance. It honoureth thee that thou soughtest for greatness, but it betrayeth thee also. Thou art not great. Thou bad old magician, that is the best and the honestest thing I honour in thee, that thou hast become weary of thyself, and hast expressed it. I am not great. Therein do I honour thee as a penitent in spirit, and although only for the twinkling of an eye, in that one moment wast thou genuine.
No, says Zarathustra, he still isn't genuine. The only genuine thing about him is that his spirit admits that he isn't great, but this admittance did not cause him to change. This is why he is a penitent in spirit. Just like the sublime ones, his spirit created a lofty ideal, the ideal of being genuine, but his nature cannot live up to this ideal. Of course, being genuine is not an unattainable ideal for humans, but it is for the magician, because of how corrupted he has become. This is why he is only somewhat of a penitent in spirit. In the sublime ones, Zarathustra points out how ugly the penitent in spirit are to him, and we see that the magician is so ugly to him that he can't even look at him.
But tell me, What seekest thou here in my forests and rocks? And if thou hast put thyself in my way, what proof of me wouldst thou have? Wherein didst thou put me to the test? Thus spake Zarathustra, and his eyes sparkled. But the old magician kept silence for a while. Then said he, Did I put thee to the test? I seek only. O Zarathustra, I seek a genuine one, a right one, a simple one, an unequivocal one, a man of perfect honesty, a vessel of wisdom, a saint of knowledge, a great man. Knowest thou it not, O Zarathustra? I seek Zarathustra.
Zarathustra now wonders why this charade was necessary. What exactly did the magician try to achieve by putting him to the test? It turns out that the magician is just like the people he met before. A higher man who could no longer live in contemporary society and is seeking for something loftier. Like them, he knows that Zarathustra represents a loftier way of life. What he especially admires in him is exactly the thing that is the opposite of what he hates in himself. The fact that he is honest, genuine, and straightforward.
And here there arose a long silence between them. Zarathustra, however, became profoundly absorbed in thought, so that he shut his eyes. But afterwards, coming back to the situation, he grasped the hand of the magician and said, full of politeness and policy, Well, up thither leadeth the way. There is the cave of Zarathustra. In it mayest thou seek him whom thou wouldst fain find. And ask counsel of mine animals, mine eagle and my serpent. They shall help thee to seek. My cave, however, is large.
We recall that in the first chapter of the fourth part, Zarathustra said that he wants to fish interesting people who will challenge his wisdom and make him think new thoughts. It appears to be working, as the encounter with the magician makes him sink in deep thought for a while. He then snaps out of it, and invites the magician to join the other guests in his cave. This makes Zarathustra the opposite of Plato. Plato wanted to take people out of the cave. Zarathustra pulls them in. Plato, of course, was one of the original sublime ones, one who aspired to transcend earthly life and live by eternal metaphysical ideals. He is the one who put this idea into Western philosophy, and those who fell for it came to regard the earthly life as a dark cave that they must get out of in order to reach a truthful life. For Nietzsche, this is the idea that ruined and corrupted Western spirit, making people miserable. Zarathustra's cave is now the only place where you can escape this Platonic hell, a place where his animals reign and ascribe a reason that sees earthly life as a truthful life, and Plato's metaphysical realm as a sham we must liberate our minds from. He hopes that in this cave, the magician, and his other guests, will find happiness. Of course, the magician didn't say that he seeks happiness. What he seeks is a great man. Zarathustra sends him to his cave to look for him there, but says this about the chances to find him.
I myself, to be sure, I have as yet seen no great man. That which is great, the acutest eye is at present insensible to it. It is the kingdom of the populace. Many a one have I found who stretched and inflated himself, and the people cried, Behold a great man! But what good do all bellows do? The wind cometh out at last. At last bursteth the frog, which hath inflated itself too long. Then cometh out the wind. To prick a swollen one in the belly, I call good pastime. Hear that, ye boys! Our today is of the populace, who still knoweth what is great and what is small, who could there seek successfully for greatness. A fool only, it succeedeth with fools.
In our time, asserts Zarathustra, there are no great men. The values are determined by the populace, by the rabble, and no great man can grow on such ground. Moreover, we don't even know anymore what greatness is, because our minds are so shaped by the populace that we can't even tell greatness when we see it. Therefore, it is a fool's errand to seek great men.
Thou seekest for great men, thou strange fool? Who taught that to thee? Is today the time for it? O thou bad seeker, why dost thou tempt me? Thus spake Zarathustra, comforted in his heart, and went laughing on his way.
Then again, Zarathustra confesses that he is tempted by the magician's quest. He, too, would like to find a great man. But he knows it's foolish, so he goes back to his quest, the quest for the higher man. This reminds us that we should not confuse a higher man with a great man. A higher man, in contemporary times, is not someone who is great, but someone who is somewhat higher than the rabble, or perceived as higher than them. The magician is such a man, and initially Zarathustra thought that he was the one in distress. But it turned out that he was only acting for Zarathustra, so it couldn't have been him. He leaves him behind, and carries on searching.